People think the wealthy have a secret map. They imagine that somewhere, behind closed doors, there is a cleaner set of instructions available only to the 1%. I spent years around professional finance. I studied the language, I worked inside the machinery, and the truth is both more ordinary and more useful than people expect. The wealthy do not win because they know magic formulas. They win because they know where they stand, where they want to go, and what every financial decision is doing to the gap between those 2 points. That is the real map, not a secret product, not a hidden stock tip, not a glamorous life hack, just clarity, discipline, and a refusal to let money drift. That is what I want to talk about, because most people do not lose with money because they are foolish. They lose because they are vague. They do not know their real numbers. They do not know their net worth. They do not know what their lifestyle actually costs over a year. They do not know whether they are building assets or liabilities. They do not know whether the decisions they keep making are buying them freedom or quietly selling it away. And if you do not know those things, you can stay very busy with money while going nowhere. The source you gave me is strongest when it strips everything back to that idea. It says you need a brutally honest picture of where you stand now, then a clear picture of where you want to go, and then a system that connects the two through budgeting, saving, investing, and major decisions like debt, cars, and housing. Fay file site Fay turn 11, file 0 Fay. That is exactly right. If you do not know where you are, you cannot make intelligent decisions about where you should go. The first thing I would always want to know is simple. What comes in, what goes out, what remains? People complicate this too early. They think they need perfect categories, fancy dashboards, advanced modeling. Numbers start with the core truth. What is your net income for the year? What are your real expenses for the year? And what is the surplus or the deficit after the two meet? The source argues very strongly for doing this on a yearly basis rather than only month to month, because the annual lens captures the surprise bills, the one-off expenses, and the things people conveniently forget when they only look at a recent month. Fay file site, Fay turn 11, file 0 Fay. That is wise. A month can lie to you. A year is harder to fool. And if the number is negative, then you know something painful but useful. You are bleeding, not in theory, not emotionally. In arithmetic, if the number is positive, then you know something equally important. And that room, no matter how small, is the beginning of everything good in finance. I have always believed that the gap between income and spending is one of the most important numbers in life, because the gap is what purchases future freedom. Income buys your current lifestyle. Net worth buys your independence. The source says something close to that when it explains that income pays for your life, but net worth is what eventually buys your freedom. Fay file site, Fay turn 11, file 0 Fay. Exactly. That distinction is critical. A person can have a very high income and still be weak if the income is consumed as fast as it arrives. Another person can have a moderate income and grow steadily strong if a persistent surplus keeps being converted into assets. That is why I care much more about the gap than the paycheck alone. The paycheck is not the asset. What the paycheck leaves behind becomes the asset. Now, once you understand the flow of money, you must understand the stock of money. That means net worth. Assets minus liabilities. What you own minus what you owe again. People make this more mystical than it is. Savings, investments, a home if you own one, major valuable assets. Then subtract the mortgage, the loans, the credit card balances, the car financing, the obligations. What remains is the honest score. The source lays this out very clearly and ties it to one of the most useful habits in money. Over time, you want more of your income buying assets and fewer of your choices building liabilities. Fay-Filicite Fay-Turn, 11 file, 0 Fay. That is the whole game. Every decision either strengthens the balance sheet or weakens it. People like to think financial life is made up of many separate debates. Should I buy this? Should I lease that? Should I move there? Should I finance this? Should I upgrade? I prefer a simpler framework. Does this build an asset, or does it build a liability? If you keep asking that question, the fog starts to clear. Now there is another part of the source that many people would skip over too quickly, but I think it matters: money personality. The source includes a framework of several money personalities and argues that the way people approach life, risk, spending, and security influences how they handle finances. Fay-Filicite, Fay-Turn 11, file 0 Fay. That is true. Personal finance is called personal for a reason. A strategy that looks perfect on paper but violates your temperament is not a good strategy. A person who loves living in the moment needs a system that saves automatically, because relying on willpower is foolish. A highly cautious person may need more visible cash reserves before feeling comfortable enough to invest. A goal-driven planner may do beautifully with a detailed forecast. A person who is highly social and experience-oriented may need strong boundaries around discretionary spending, or he will rationalize anything. The point is not to make excuses. The point is to build a system that fits the human being who must actually live inside it. That matters because the best plan is not the cleverest one. It is the one you can keep. Now let us talk about debt. The source makes a very useful distinction here. Not all debt is identical. Some debt can increase future earning power or be attached to an appreciating asset. Other debt simply drains you. Credit cards, payday loans, short-term finance deals, and high-interest consumer borrowing are typically the dangerous kind. Fay-Filicite Fay-Turn 11 file 0 Fay. That is a critical distinction. I dislike slogans about debt because they flatten reality. Debt is not a religion. It is a tool. Used properly, it can be productive. Used foolishly, it is a chain. The question is not, is all debt good or bad? The question is, what is the debt buying and what is the debt costing? If the debt helps create earning power or attaches to a sensible appreciating asset within your broader financial plan, that is one thing. If the debt exists because you wanted a lifestyle before you earned the right to support it, that is another. Most bad debt is really impatience with interest attached. The source is strong here because it does not merely preach. It tells you to gather every debt in one place, list the balance, the rate, the minimum payment, the due date, and then choose a repayment strategy, either avalanche for mathematical efficiency or snowball for emotional momentum. Fay-Filicite, Fay-Turn 11 file 0 Fay. That is very sensible. I personally prefer efficiency. If a debt is charging you a punishing interest rate, I want that thing dead first. But I am not so arrogant as to ignore psychology. If a snowball gives someone the confidence to keep going, that is far better than admiring the avalanche method and never really following it. Both systems are superior to drift. Drift is what kills people. The source also mentions balanced transfer cards and the difference between debit and credit cards. And again, the point is not the tool itself, but whether the user is disciplined enough to pay in full and use the structure intelligently rather than emotionally. Fay-Filicite. Fay-Turn 11, file 0 Fay. Exactly. Every financial tool can be a weapon against you if it flatters your impulses. So after honesty and after debt comes the most important thing of all: purpose, goals, not vague wishes. Not saying you want to be comfortable compared to what? Not saying you want freedom. Freedom to do what? The source tells the viewer to write down every financial goal, even the ones that feel unrealistic, and then assign a time frame to each one. That is not a trivial exercise. It is how vague desire becomes strategy. Fay file site, Fay turn 11, file 0 Fay I, like that very much. Because once the timeline exists, the money can be given its proper job. Short-term money should behave differently from long-term money. A lot of financial errors come from forcing the wrong kind of money into the wrong role. The source divides goals into short-term, medium-term, and long-term, and the distinctions matter. Short-term money needs safety and access. Medium-term money can work harder, and long-term money generally needs exposure to investments if you want a realistic chance of beating inflation and reaching large goals. Fay site, Fay turn 11, file 0 Fay, that is exactly right. The most dangerous mistake is to treat all future money as if it belongs in the same place. Emergency reserves, holidays, near-term house deposits, tax bills, and short-dated expenses should not be put at the mercy of equity markets. That is childish. At the same time, retirement money and truly long, horizon wealth should not be left sleeping in lazy cash forever. That is also childish. Adult money management is asset, location by time horizon. It is understanding that the when of the goal determines the how of the money. The source supports this with historical market examples over 1-year, 10-year, and 20-year periods, showing that short periods can be highly unpredictable, while long periods have historically been much more forgiving and often strongly positive. Fay file site, Fay turn 11, file 0 Fay, that is one of the most useful patterns people can learn. Short-term markets are moods. Long-term markets are engines, and if you mix those ideas up, you get hurt. Now, once you have goals and time frames, you must make the road visible. That means budgeting. I know people hate the word. They think budget means punishment. They think budget means smaller life. They think budget means restriction. A good budget is a map. The source uses a car analogy that I like very much. Your goals are the destinations. The 12-month forecast is the road, and the monthly check. Ins are the dashboard that tells you whether you are staying on course. Fay file site, Fay turn 11, file 0 Fay. That is a fine analogy, because what most people call living freely with money is really just driving without a map and hoping a good destination appears by accident. It rarely does. The source suggests creating a baseline 12-month forecast by projecting your current income and spending forward, separating out savings and investments deliberately, and then asking where spending can be trimmed to move more money toward future goals. Fay file site, Fay turn 11, file 0 Fay, that is exactly how thoughtful people should do it. Not every month will be identical. Life does not work that way. But a yearly forecast makes the pattern visible. The annual insurance renewal, the holiday spending, the wedding abroad in August, the tax bill, the forgotten subscription, the travel spike, the school fee. When you can see the year, you stop acting surprised by things that were completely predictable. And predictable financial pain is one of the most absurd categories of pain. Now on the month-to-month level, the source offers a simple framework in the 50-30-20 style with fundamentals, fun and future. U categories while also stressing that the percentages are benchmarks, not sacred law. Fay file site, Fay turn 11, file 0 Fay, that is exactly how I think those frameworks should be used, as benchmarks, not commandments. What matters is not whether your percentages are identical to somebody else's. What matters is whether your spending structure reflects your goals rather than your impulses. And the 3 questions the source recommends during monthly reviews are excellent. Do I need this? If I need it, can I live with less of it? And can I get the same thing for less? Fay file site, Fay turn 11, file 0 Fay. Those are adult questions. The answers are often not heroic. They are practical. Utilities can be negotiated. Phone bills can be reviewed. Insurance can be compared. Groceries can be bought more intelligently. A lot of people imagine wealth is mainly built through dramatic decisions. Sometimes it is. Often it is built through small, repeated reductions in leakage. Now let us move to where people keep their money, because this matters and is widely misunderstood. The source explains the basic bank model. Very simply, banks do not keep your money idle for sentimental reasons. They lend it out, charge borrowers more than they pay you, and keep the spread. File cite Turn 11 file 0 Fe. That is correct. And it means that if you are careless about where your cash sits, you are simply donating margin. That does not mean every dollar should be pushed into some complicated instrument. It means cash should be placed intentionally easy. Access savings for true liquidity. Notice accounts are fixed-term structures when the timeline fits. Higher yield providers or platforms when the safety and access profile makes sense for your needs. Cash should work as hard as its job description allows. That is the right way to think about it. Now we come to one of the most important transitions in the whole piece: when to invest. The source gives a clear progression I broadly agree with. Build roughly 1 month of expenses. First, kill high-interest debt above a certain threshold. Then continue building the emergency fund while beginning to invest for long-term goals at the same time. File cite Turn 11 file 0 Fe. That is an elegant structure. Why? Because it respects both psychology and mathematics. 1 month of expenses gives breathing room, destroying very high. Interest debt gives you an immediate guaranteed return that markets cannot promise. Then building cash reserves and investing simultaneously lets you keep making progress on both safety and growth rather than waiting forever for a feeling of total readiness. I like that. Financial systems should move on multiple tracks whenever possible. Safety, growth, debt reduction, all coordinated, not one giant all or nothing drama. This leads naturally to planning for major future goals. The source uses examples like a home down payment or building toward $1 million, and talks about working backwards from the goal amount, expected return, time frame, monthly contributions, and any initial lump sum to discover the investment gap between what you ideally need to invest and what you can actually invest now. File cite Turn 11 file 0 Fe. That is exactly how rational people should think. Dreams become plans the moment you force them into numbers. A vague wish has no operational value. A number with a date has enormous value. On C, you know the gap. You can work with it. You can extend the timeline, increase the income. Improve the saving rate, raise the monthly contribution. Contribute a lump sum. Change the return assumptions responsibly. Most people never get that far. They live in wishful finance. I prefer mechanical finance. Now let us turn to investment strategy itself. The source says something very important. You should not invest the same throughout your entire life, because age, risk tolerance, and proximity to retirement should affect how much of the portfolio is focused on growth versus preservation. It even offers a rough age-based bond allocation rule as a baseline. File cite Turn 11 file 0 Fe. That is a useful starting point, not a holy text. A starting point. The exact percentages can vary with temperament and circumstance. A person in his 50s who is calm in a bad market may be able to hold more equity than a panicked 30-year old who will sell the moment the screen turns red. The source is right to emphasize that risk tolerance is not theoretical. It is about whether you can sleep at night and continue following the plan when conditions get unpleasant. File cite Turn 11 file 0 Fe. That is exactly right. A plan you cannot keep is not your plan. This is also why I care about concentration risk, which the source sensibly raises through company stock and similar exposures. If one employer, one theme, one sector, or one idea dominates your financial future, You may feel rich when it is rising and discover that you are merely concentrated when it falls. Fay-Felicite, Fay-Turn 11 File 0 Fay diversification is not exciting. That is fine. Excitement is overrated. Survival is underrated. Now let us move to one of my favorite sections because it reveals how badly people confuse lifestyle and logic cars. The source says, transportation is one of the top 3 expenses in many people's lives and one of the biggest wealth drainers, then walks through frameworks like the 25 to 35% rule of annual income for purchase price, the 24-10 financing rule, and the trade-off between financing a newer vehicle and buying an older used car outright. Fay-Felicite Fay-Turn 11, File 0 Fay. That is excellent material. Because car buying is where identity usually starts screaming. People want the machine to say something about them. That is expensive. The source's 24-10 framework with 20% down, no more than 4 years of financing, and total monthly car-related costs held to about 10% of income, is useful. Not because it is perfect, but because it forces discipline into a decision that people otherwise make almost entirely by emotion. Fay-Felicite Fay-Turn 11 File 0 Fay exactly. And the most valuable warning in this section is about thinking in total cost, not monthly payment. Dealers love monthly thinking because almost anything can be made to look manageable if the time frame is stretched and the costs are hidden behind small monthly numbers. Adults must reverse that. Think total cost. Think interest. Think ownership cost. Think opportunity cost. If you do that, a lot of cars lose their charm immediately. The source even highlights delayed gratification as the real wealth builder here. By comparing a financed new car to a used car bought outright, where the monthly payments you avoided can later become cash for a better purchase or investment. Fay-Felicite Fay-Turn 11 File 0 Fay, that is the whole principle of sound money in miniature. Spend less. Now, buy more freedom later. The same principle appears again in the housing section. The source handles this carefully, and I appreciate that. It does not pretend buying is always superior. It walks through sunk costs like property taxes or stamp duty, legal fees, valuation fees, and other one-off buying costs, then adds maintenance, opportunity cost of the down payment, and the mortgage interest burden over time. It compares that with renting costs and then adds the psychological differences between stability and flexibility. Fay-Felicite, Fay-Turn 11, File 0 Fay, that is the right way to talk about housing. Housing is never just a spreadsheet, and it is never just an emotion. It is both. Buying offers control, permanence, the ability to alter the property, and the emotional comfort of not being at a landlord's mercy. Renting offers flexibility, lower maintenance responsibility, and sometimes the ability to keep large sums deployed elsewhere. The source is exactly right when it says the decision should be made based on your market, your goals, your lifestyle, your timeline, and the opportunity cost of the money. Not on inherited slogans from your parents' generation. Fay-Felicite Fay-Turn 11 File 0. Fay, that is one of the deepest truths in personal finance. Market conditions change, rates change, cities change, your life changes. What matters is whether the decision you make increases your actual freedom and net worth relative to the alternatives, taking into account both money and psychology. That is how I would want any major decision made. Now, let me pull all of this together, because at this point the pattern should be visible. The 1% is not using a different universe. They are using a clearer sequence. Know the present with painful honesty. Separate assets from liabilities. Destroy destructive debt. Define goals with dates. Forecast the year. Review the month. Put short. Term money where it is safe. Put long. Term money where it can grow. Use tax rules intelligently. Adjust the portfolio as life changes. Refuse to let identity hijack cars. Refuse to let slogans hijack housing. That is not magic. That is clarity. And clarity is one of the most profitable things in the world, because vagueness is expensive. Vagueness lets you drift into debt. Vagueness lets you rent an identity. Vagueness lets you confuse visible income with invisible weakness. Vagueness lets you call yourself busy while the balance sheet quietly bleeds. That is why I think financial literacy is not mainly about memorizing terminology. It is about making money visible enough that your choices become honest. Once the numbers are visible, the lies get harder. The life you cannot afford becomes harder to justify. The debt becomes harder to ignore. The goal becomes real enough to build around. The monthly waste becomes harder to romanticize. And from there, something very important happens. Money stops being a source of ambient guilt. It becomes a system. Systems can be improved. Guilt cannot. That is why I like this whole framework so much. Not because every percentage is perfect, not because every person should use the same spreadsheet, but because it takes money out of the emotional fog and puts it back into the realm of decisions. That is where it belongs. If you want to manage money like the top 1%, that is where you begin. Not with pretending to be rich, with refusing to be vague, not with looking expensive, with knowing your numbers, not with one big winning investment, with 1,000 small decisions aligned to the same destination. That is how wealth is really built quietly, structurally, honestly. And the beautiful part is that none of that requires a finance degree. It requires attention. It requires discipline. It requires enough self-respect to tell yourself the truth. Once you do that, the rest becomes far less mysterious. Not easy, but much less mysterious. And that is more than enough to begin.